Hello and welcome. My name is Avon, and in this video, we're going to be talking about how to be successful with your Zoho implementation. If you're watching this video, it is the presentation that I gave at Zoholics 2025 in Sydney. And this video talks through some of the critical elements that you need to be aware of when engaging with your Zoho partner. It's going to help you be more successful. It's going to help them understand and work with you better and ultimately end up in a better project outcome. Okay, so we're going to go through the slides and we're just going to talk through some of the elements, but effectively this is the presentation that hopefully if you've been there in person, then you've seen it, and this is the rehash. Otherwise, if this is the first time watching this, thank you for watching. So as I mentioned, this is a guide to implementation success. So today we're going to talk about, gathering requirements, getting your team involved, how the partner gets involved, and if you're in the session live, you have the Q&A. Unfortunately, you don't have it in this video. So just a little bit about us and our experience. So, we've been a partner for 7 years. We work with everyone from small business through to ASX clients. As you can see in the photos, we've done quite a lot with Zoho. We've been to the Chennai office in India. We've been to Zoholics in Bangalore, where I met with the co-founder of Zoho. Zoho's come and done a YouTube video with us. And so we've filmed our client, and you can see a couple of shots there. And then, of course, you can see our office. We've got a team in India. We've got people in Brisbane, Sydney, Melbourne, and Thailand, but consistently growing. And this photo is a few months old, and already there's some extra people there. We're a veteran-owned business. Myself and my business partner were in the army together 10 years ago. So one of the things that you need to do when you first start out is you need to understand the environment. Now, this is kind of like measure twice, cut once. So the first thing we like to do is sort of a 360-degree review. This is where we're talking to, people in the organization, outside the organization, and just really understanding the issue at hand. Because sometimes, like in a small business, you're on top of everything, you're in the middle of everything. And as your business grows and develops and you start to have staff, your memory of where you were at the start is a little bit different in that you never had to report to management. And so you need to change the way you think about the organization, and you need to ask people at different levels so that you can understand their perspective. What are the requirements of them now as an employee? What do they need to achieve to be able to make you, the owner, successful or make the business successful? So having the conversation with people at different levels does a number of things. One, it provides a perspective. And that perspective changes from the owner mindset to the employee mindset. But two, it also gets them on board. It helps them to understand that they're contributing to what will ultimately be something that is going to make their life better, going to make their life easier. And so that really helps with reducing bottlenecks, reducing problems in the implementation process, because they're on board. They understand the value it's going to bring. They're going to adopt the system faster, and you're going to see results faster. So it's really important just to take that first step and really understand what it is that we're solving for. What problem are we trying to solve for? Now, I've written in here stakeholders because it's not just you. Sometimes it's people outside of your organization. We often talk with, finance brokers, and they have an upstream. They have an aggregator. We talk with franchisees, and they have an upstream. They have a franchisor that controls some of the processes that they have to deal with. And it may not always be that. It might be, in the medical profession, you have legal and technical requirements to meet to certify and continue operating, for example, with ISO certifications or some form of medical certification to continue operating in that industry. So we need to be aware of those things and how they interact with the build. Another thing we might look at is, what do your customers expect? What does the organizations that you deal with, what systems do they use? Can you integrate with it? Can you get information out of them or provide information to them in a way that reduces the manual time, the manual labor, the sticking points within your business? So if we can make data available or make data collection simple, then more likely you are going to get other people outside your organization to provide information in your system in the format that you need it, in order to be faster and more efficient and to save money and to grow your understanding of your own environment so that you can pounce on opportunity and make decisions much faster. One way I like to approach getting that 360-degree view is to interview people in the top, middle, and the bottom. So people at the top are concerned with management, metrics, control, and things like that. People in the middle, they're kind of doing a lot of communicating. They're understanding what the board requires, and they're pushing it down to the lower levels, and they're also getting feedback from the lower levels and pushing it upstream. So their priority is communication. And then at the lower levels, their concern is doing the job. They're at the coalface, they're doing the work, and sometimes putting information in can be frustrating, or getting information out can be frustrating. And so we want to understand where those pain points and those bottlenecks lie, because if you want management insights, then you need to get the frontline workers involved in putting information into the system so that the middle management can clean it, organize it, understand things, deal with short-term problems, and push it back up to management. So it's really important to have everybody's perspective. And sometimes it's not just one person at the coalface. I might interview 2, 3, or something like that. But you don't have to do that through a consultant. You can do that yourself. As long as you understand what it is that we're solving for, then we're going to build a much better outcome. Or ideally, it's something you do in partnership with your Zoho partner. You need to understand the motivations of everyone in the chain. And sometimes that's why it's handy to have a third party come in and do that interview, because it can often circumvent any of the politics, or it brings a fresh perspective instead of it just being, I need this because, their job is riding on it. Maybe they had a performance discussion the week before. Maybe there's some other issue that's not being discussed that no one's talking about because, they've been told off about talking about it before. But it can be very useful to have somebody else observe something and say, this is an issue. And it might be that unspoken thing that can solve so many issues, but you would never have known if you hadn't have asked the question, what is the motivations of everyone involved? And some of those motivations, you might have one person that absolutely screaming for one particular feature, but if you zoom out the grand scheme of things, maybe that's not going to move the needle in your business. Maybe it's not going to have as much of a business impact as something else that maybe 10 people are asking for that's a little bit simpler to deliver, and that would provide a much better outcome for your business anyway. Now, another important framing in this 360-degree review is sort of to imagine what the business needs and will need over the next period of time. So it might be the next 12 months, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years. What are you trying to achieve? What are the things that you need strategically in your own business that will set you up for success down the line? For example, I wouldn't go choosing software because it's cheap. I would go choosing software because it's going to deliver an outcome that is going to be significant. For example, we've seen where people have tried to cut the license cost down by $10 a user by going on this particular plan, but then end up spending 10 times as much in workarounds to get that thing working. That's only one small example. This happens on very large scales and it becomes very, very expensive. When I say cost-centric versus value-centric, what I mean is have a look at the big picture. Have a look at either the speed of delivery that you are going to get because you're implementing this particular system. Have a look at the throughput, so now you can handle more customers in the same time. Have a look at the employee time cost. How much does that person's salary cost to do that report manually? Whereas if we had have just implemented something, now you can do it on one click. And we have an example where we've done that and saved 5 days of manual report creation every month of someone who's on an $80,000 salary. So the cost to build that thing, and whether it's license fees or whether it's consulting fees, the cost to do that was a drop in the ocean compared to the value that it delivered for the business. And now they have better reporting, they have more information, and they can make better decisions, which have yet again a much bigger impact on the business than, we had to spend some money on ours. So whilst you're doing your assessment, and ultimately the output is that you've documented something that can be used and built into a project plan. So there's a couple of things that you should and shouldn't do when we're doing this part of the phase. So first of all, we don't want to write something that's so big that takes so long that nobody can understand. And then you create such a rigid plan that you have no way of adjusting and changing based on user needs, because there's a future state when you are inside the platform and you are working away and you are now seeing new possibilities. You are now seeing new opportunities for improvement and development. Maybe there's new things you didn't know were possible. And so you can't measure the future completely accurate because you don't have that experience inside the use of the platform. So if you say that this button has to be on this screen with this text and have this outcome, that might be a little bit too specific. And the reason why you would want to allow a little bit of wiggle room is that people have aha moments along the way. And you might build a feature that you think is amazing, but then the customer doesn't understand it or no one uses it, or maybe the original thinking wasn't quite right. So what's often better is to understand the user story or the issue that you're trying to solve. So maybe it's when the customer comes in, they need to fill out a form, and then that form needs to go to this department for a kickoff email, and something else has to happen after that. So rather than mandating the form must have 23 fields on it, at the top of the form we have this field, and in the middle of the form we have a line break at 22 centimeters, etc. Too much. I've seen it where people have gone and written, 50-page documents, and that would have taken weeks to produce when probably all they needed was 1 or 2 A4 sheets with a dot point list of process 1, process 2, process 3. So you kind of want to build a little bit of a storyline of the things that people need to do in their business, or what the customer does, or what the employee does, or what when you're onboarding a new employee. Maybe they go through, fill out a form, you put them into the recruitment HRIS platform, and then they get their laptop issued, etc. So talk more about the story and less about the features or the functions, very specific. Unless there is something in specific detail because it's going to interact with another system, at that point we can drill down on that. But the initial first stage, don't go writing too much. You also don't want to mandate specific apps. We have to use this for this and that for that, and something else for something else. The value of Zoho is it's like a box of Lego. There are so many possibilities. There's so many things that you can connect together. There's so many things that you can build in there. And generally, there's 3 to 5 ways to do anything in Zoho. And there's different reasons why you would do each thing. So one of the best ways of having that story list is we can then talk through each scenario and go, well, what about this and what about that? And why would we do this? Your Zoho partner understands the implications of each outcome and why you would choose one path over another. And so it's often better just to put the story in and then talk about it with the partner so they can make their own notes and just clarify their own understanding of that. Don't think about licensing straight away. A lot of times people go into license mode of we need this app, we need that app. What often happens is people start measuring based on cost rather than the value and the outcome. And sometimes they make decisions that then constrain the upside or the outcome upside that ultimately ends up in them having to spend more in development to get the platform to do what they want, instead of just maybe changing to a slightly more expensive license, but then unlock 50 or 100 new features that would absolutely return the value and then some. Now, in the world of AI and information, ChatGPT and Google have been really great ways to get information about what it is that you need to do next. You can search up and there's videos, and we've created videos and we've created blogs and guides, and we've got our YouTube channel, and all of that helps in identifying a defined process. But the thing that it won't give you is that contextual specific information. It's not going to answer your unasked question. A partner can observe your business, understand what it is that you're doing, and ask you questions and give you ideas that you never thought of. Probably because you're only working in your own industry and you haven't seen how 10, 20, 30 other industries or similar clients have done similar things. And so that experience, when that comes over into your space, it means that they can ask you things that you would never have asked Google or ChatGPT because you didn't know to ask them. That's not a problem. I'm just saying don't rely on those as the sole source of truth. They can definitely help you put this field into that record page. They can help you, solve a integration issue, but that's a very granular level. The other thing is, in the early days of search and SEO, people would often put information into the system that was not always correct. You know, half the time if you Google what rash you have, it always tells you you're going to die. So you need to be a little bit careful and take it with a grain of salt. The other thing is, don't build in isolation. Having those conversations with different people helps you to understand the context of why we're building certain features, why we're building certain functions, and that will allow you to really put the depth and thought into, does this field need to do this or does it need to do that? And it will really accelerate adoption, and it will make the information flow much, much easier, help you to build better reports, get more out of it, and grow the value of your business. So what should you do? You definitely need to identify the problem. We talked about doing that 360-degree review. You need to ask 5 why. Now, 5 why was developed by Toyota, and it was about root cause analysis, identifying the problem properly, not just asking, why isn't this broken? And then taking that first answer at face value, because quite often that is solving a symptom and not the root cause. So in Toyota, we would ask, why are the wheels not on the car? Because we don't have any bolts. Why don't we have any bolts? Because Jerry forgot to order them. Why did Jerry forget to order them? Because he's homesick. Why is he homesick? Because he Googled his rash and he thinks he's going to die. So obviously, there's a whole bunch of reasons, and we didn't get to 5 why there, but we understand that there's a whole bunch of steps in the chain that are going to get you to the point of what the issue was that caused it. And you might find that simply asking a question at the start of the engagement might change the future direction, or might change 10, 20, 30 problems down the line that exacerbate over time. For example, getting the right information at lead capture stage can prevent a ton of time wasted with the wrong person. So if you ask a few simple questions at the start of the call, you might be able to direct them to the right department. You might be able to reduce the amount of questions that they have because you can answer a few immediately. You might speed up and accelerate the sales process. You might also avoid spending time with a client that's not the right fit for you. So all of those are just a small example of a lot of things in the chain that can be improved. Could be something to do with project delivery. Maybe there's a issue that could be 5 steps down the line, could be avoided completely by asking a simpler question earlier in the process. So you need to create user stories. And to do that, you can do either a flow chart or a dot point list, or describe a process and let your partner write it down. Now, one thing I don't necessarily like with flow charts is that sometimes it becomes a little bit of an arts and crafts project. And so what that means is somebody is spending hours and hours to produce a beautifully constructed flow of documents. And what this does is distracts from what they're actually trying to solve for. They forget what it is they're writing down, and the value doesn't make it into the document, but they made an awesome connection between a square and a circle. Now, I just think that a dot point list allows you to quickly jot it all down, and then you can insert new lines in between dots and go, oh, I forgot this step. Or you can bring something up from further down and quickly just paste it in at the top. So it helps you to restructure and reorganize, like what we're saying is bring forward that idea or that thought into the start of the conversation instead of further down, because we realize in the dot point process that we should have moved this further up the chain because it's going to solve problem X, Y, and Z later on. Another thing you should do is definitely involve your users in the process. Show them the document, and they might add something and say, oh, you forgot this, or it would be handy if we asked this earlier because it's going to solve this problem for me later. And that is going to give you things that you can't see. It's going to help reduce your blind spots so that you end up with a much better process, and then we end up with a much better build as a result, because building the right thing is important. Otherwise, you're going to have to go back to it later. So measure twice, cut once. Now, remember that this is a team project with you and your Zoho partner. Ideally, it's not something you just hand off. Now, sometimes partners have templates, and that really does help. But ultimately, they're there to work with you because you have your domain knowledge and they have the platform knowledge, and as well as experience implementing it on a regular basis. Implementation is something you don't do on a regular basis, and running your business is something they don't do on a regular basis. So it's very useful to come together and try to build a joint project that you will both be successful in, because ultimately the partner is there to make you successful. Partners win when you win. Partners want you to have a very successful build and for you to be talking about them positively after the fact. So both parties need time to understand each other. So in that process, you might have a few meetings, you talk in a little bit of detail about those processes, you get any questions solved for each other. And ultimately, you should have a project champion. You can't just kind of expect the partner to know exactly what you do and how your business runs. They're not mind readers. And there is nuance and detail in every single project. They need time to talk to you. They need time to understand you, what you're doing and why. And that's just going to help them build a better project. So if you can talk with your partner and come together and say, well, this might work, or maybe this is a better idea, and you build that shared project, then that's gonna work really well. But you can't do that unless there's a project champion. So you need someone that can communicate to the partner on a regular basis. Maybe they're listening to all the conversations inside the business. Maybe they're doing that 360-degree review and consolidating it down into a few dot points that they think is really important. And ideally, the communication is well organized. So there could be a chat feed or a central space where you and the partner can share files and have chats and update each other about certain things. Because the worst thing for a partner to do is to take your requirements, go away in a dark cupboard somewhere, build for 6 months, and then come back and go, here we go. Ultimately, you want to be working together on a regular basis, checking in every week or something like that. Both parties need to minimize jargon. Sometimes the partner can get very techy. They need to try and minimize that. And in your own business, in your own corporate knowledge, you've got your own jargon. You need to minimize that. It's not anyone's fault that you don't understand the other side. You each have your specializations. So you need to come together, build a shared vocabulary, and build based on that. Remember that you need to build in the right architecture. Your business is not so unique and special that you can't use a tried and tested format for constructing information or for gathering and collating information. And the way the structure is built is designed to work well with things like server processing time and API limitations and compute power. So you kind of need to have a framework that can link, that can load fast on the screen, that can give context, and it's also how reports go together. So what we're talking about is a series of database tables that connect together and that interlink and that provide context and detail. And so we don't want to build in the wrong way. We need to use the platform the way it's designed, because that's what's going to allow you to use the features that are already built. Quite often we see everybody try to do everything on the contact record or on the lead record, and then they miss out on the reporting, or they miss out on a filtering process, or the lead and the contact both are connected to the emails. So if you're not using those, you have to rebuild an email connector to get that to work. And there's certain limitations in your capability of doing that. The other thing is there's heaps of reports and analytics already built that you don't have to go and rebuild. So if you build something in a new module, let's just say you build a custom module to handle it, now you've just created another problem or another mess. You've got ways to segment within contacts. You've got ways to segment within accounts and deals. You can have multiple pipelines. You can have different contact types. You can have different layouts. However, I like to avoid using layouts because it causes excessive issues later, because each layout has to have its own workflow set and has to have its own triggers and automations and blueprints. So anytime you want to make a change on one, if you've got 10 different layout sets, then you have to make every change on every layout set if it's applicable to all of them. However, if you have very different pathways for very different types of contacts, then perhaps you might consider using layouts, but I generally like to avoid it. We want to avoid cluttering the records with excessive fields. Sometimes when you think you need a field, just stop and just decide, is there a field that already exists that we could use? And you can't always use that contextual information. We once had someone that had 100 fields on a form that they used as like an intake form or a needs assessment. And so they tried to put all the information on the contact record, and it just absolutely cluttered, and it made it really hard to find the right things. And all they needed to do was just leave that information on the form, and then the form saves as an attachment. So yes, they would bring in the high level data, name, email, phone, contact information, any of those sorts of key fields. And then all of that open questions and long answers, that could be in the PDF just as a bit of text. And that's attached then to the document. Maybe have a checkbox to go needs analysis completed, tick. And then they know that when that box is ticked, to go and look at the attachments, and then they will see the details of what it is that they are looking for. Now, where possible, you want to try and use pick list fields. Now, a pick list, as opposed to a tag does not allow you to force certain values. It does not allow you to group certain values. Whereas a pick list value, you can mandate exactly what it is, how it's spelt, all of those sorts of things. So when choosing between tags and pick lists, I generally prefer pick lists because you can run an automation off that. You can't run an automation off a tag. You can apply a tag in an automation, but the problem with tags is usually that it's sort of a contextual bit of information, but not something you can always rely on. For example, if I've got a lead and I call it a lead and I apply a lead tag, that's fine. But then what happens when somebody else comes along and in their mind, they're using the word prospects to define the same thing. So they bring that and they put the word prospects. Someone else uses the words prospect instead of prospects, taking away the S. Now we have 3 tags for the same thing. Then you've got someone who says a potential or a suspect. There's all these different words to say the same thing. And someone might misspell one or change the way that they've written it or something like that. And every time you do that, you create another tag. So you can't then look for the lead tag, filter by everybody that has that lead tag when there's 10 different iterations of that same value or the same meaning that you're trying to achieve. And now you're only going to get the results that were tagged with the word lead instead of all the others. So using a predefined pick list value that says lead, that is going to change the way that you filter information. It's now going to define and mandate that the process is consistent throughout the organization, and it is something that you can report on at scale. And sometimes there's some confusion over what each of these things are. So we're going to give you a quick bit of detail on what each element does. So a lead is the top of funnel. It's the first thing that people go into. Now, the idea of a lead is it's kind of like your triage zone. It's where you get to filter out the junk and decide what you accept into your database. That way you keep your database clean. You know that before it goes in, you've got as much information as possible. You don't want things going straight into contacts with just an email or just a first name. That gives you no context. It gives you no ability to decide whether or not that is worthwhile being in your system. And it ends up just cluttering and creating noise that's not valuable. It ends up skewing your reports and causing more harm than good. So your leads is a great place to capture things. Now, personally, I like to move people out of the leads as quickly as possible. And by that, I mean, we've addressed the lead quickly. We've identified good or not. If it's not, well, we get rid of them. If they are good, I put them straight into a conversion event. Now, a conversion event accepts them into your database. And at that point, you get to decide it's going to create a contact, an account, and a deal. And we'll go into those in a minute. But a contact is the person, it's the human. An account is the company that groups it together. And the deal is the discussion over a piece of work. That is the point at which you are now moving them through the pipeline. So I put a lot into my pipeline, so I understand pipeline value. In my first conversation with them, I can generally understand, roughly what their budget is, what the project is going to be worth, and whether or not it's a conversation that is a good fit or not. If it's not, maybe they got lost and clicked the wrong button and ended up on my website when they were looking for pink shoes when realistically I'm doing CRM services. So at that point, I can make the decision, not applicable, not the right lead, it might have been a spam contact, whatever. But I can get them out of the database and focus on the people who are worthwhile, who I can deliver value to. So an account is the company or the entity or the organization, and it's effectively a grouping of people. Now, this could be a trust, a charity. It could even be the Smith family, for example. Quite often I see a lot of people trying to put multiple contacts on one contact record. And this causes trouble later on, because who are you actually talking to, and how do you have that record history of that conversation? You might talk to these people independently, but the grouping them together with the account allows you to take some high level information. You understand that they both live here or they both work there. You understand that the company's industry is X or Y. And it just allows you to identify how important that entity concept is. For example, if you had a company with, or an account with 2 or 3 people in it, that might be your 2 or 3 contacts that you actually have in the organization. But in your research of that account, you know that there's 200 or 300 employees there. So you know that account might be quite large. So you can mark the account as large. If you know they've got a lot of projects they're going to do coming up into the future, you can say account growth capacity is high. So that means that even if you start with a small project or a small deal or whatever, that you have the capacity to grow within that work, within that client over time in the future. Now, accounts can be standalone or can be related to a parent account, and they can be all sorts of things. They don't just have to be your customers. You can also keep your vendors in there, your suppliers, your referral partners, your resellers, and your stakeholders. When I move people into the database, I don't always have to have a customer. They can be slightly different. If I accept a stakeholder into my database, I'm probably not going to create a deal, but I will definitely create the contact at the very least, and perhaps the account. So then I know who that stakeholder is. Now, a stakeholder is someone that has influence in your environment. It could be someone who's in Parliament that you want to make sure that you have a conversation and you lobby for certain things so that they can influence the law to affect your industry. Now, I know that may sound bad at times, but sometimes it's very good. Maybe there's a law that's quite restrictive that doesn't allow you to do certain things. You can lobby for an amendment or a change, right? So that's a stakeholder. Then you've got your suppliers. You want to build good relationships with your suppliers. But then there's also your referral partners. These people may never do business with you, but it's very valuable to have a good relationship with them because they can bring you more customers. And sometimes you might even want to track your competitors and see what they're doing and understand what they're doing so that you can work within the marketplace to increase your market share. Next, we have contacts. Now, contacts is the human. It's the individual that you're dealing with. Now, sometimes your contacts can be related to one or multiple accounts. For example, if they're a consultant that works with a few companies, then you can tag them appropriately, particularly if they're a referral partner or someone that you know has some influence in the space. The other thing is that if they are the customer contact, that you don't always know who they are to begin with. So you have something called buyer roles where you have influencer, decision maker, gatekeeper, etc. And you might develop the understanding of what their role is in their company over time. So they might come in all guns a blazing. You know that they are very excited about the project, but over time you then determine that they're not the decision maker. And so you should actively look for other contacts within the company in order to establish a connection with someone who can make or influence the buying decision so that you can have a successful client engagement. And finally, deals. Now, deals is different to the other objects. The other objects are a little bit more long-term. A deal has a life cycle. You can have multiple deals for every customer. So let's say I've got one particular customer that might be quite large. I might talk to one department about project A. I might talk to another department about project B. Now, I'm using projects because it's relevant to me. Could be a product, multiple products, wholesale contract, could be anything. Could be a partnership opportunity. It could be donation management. It could be all sorts of things. And in fact, you can run all of them in parallel. If you have different pipelines within your platform, you can use each pipeline and customize it to that particular process. Now, ideally, you want to zoom out and have a high level understanding of the process just so that you don't have 20 or 30 stages within your pipeline process. You want to have maybe 5 or 6 or 7. You've got a high level overview of where they're at in the process. And if you have additional steps within each stage, you can use pick lists or drop downs or checkboxes or something within those phases so that you know where they're up to. Now, for that in particular, you could use the blueprint so that you can move people forward, but you don't want to overcomplicate your deal pipeline. Now, the deals allows you to do a lot of things around reporting and analytics, in particular around forecasting. Forecasting how much revenue is about to come up in the pipeline, understanding how long each sale takes to close on average. And then you can start to experiment and identify steps and processes and things that you can do in your sales process to shorten those sales cycles so that people come in and they buy much faster. What that then allows you to do is to increase your throughput with the same amount of staff. So technically you could sell 30 to 40% more with the same headcount just because your throughput is better. But ultimately, what you want to do is you want to have as many leads coming into the top of the funnel as possible. You then want to have a really good filtration process so that at the end of all of that, you have high quality leads coming at you like a fire hose. Now, building a CRM is not like building a house. Now, there is a very logical set of steps. You can't put the roof on before you've got the walls up, and you can't put either of those things up before you've got the foundation. But in software, it is very, very different. Now, yes, there are a few foundational things. So when you implement your Zoho instance, you're probably going to have to connect your emails. You're going to have to authenticate your domain. You're going to have to assign all the user licenses and give permissions and that sort of thing. That's fine. That's probably the only foundational thing that you can really sort of think about here. Now, getting back to our process design, remember when we were talking about those workflows, you can use your workflows and you might, like in the house context, you might use a bit of floor, a stove, the chimney, one roof tile, and that's your cooking process. So if you were to just build that in a house, it wouldn't work because you couldn't attach the chimney flue to anything. You can't put a roof tile up in the middle of nothing without a roof for it to hold onto. So you need to understand that in software, it is totally different. So you can't mandate, this, then this, then this, because sometimes one phase might require two things from phase one. And if you're half in production over here and you can't always sign off that, all of these things work in phase one because some things depend on something in phase 7. So you kind of need to reframe how we think about building software. To help with that concept, we need to think about a minimum viable product. Now, if we're talking about our sequential construction example, like in the house, when building a car, in the factory, they build the wheel, then they build the floor pan, they build the body, and they bolt it all together, and then you end up with the car. There's a heap of other parts as well, engine, etc. But in software, you need to be able to use that system and develop into it and grow successively. So you might start with a very simplified process, kind of like this skateboard here. But the difference is it can be used immediately. So you don't want to go building a project that the partner goes away for 6 months, builds something, and at the end of that, that's when you can finally assign it and people can start to use it. No, ultimately, you want something that you can use and get value from right away, and then increase the value of that over time because we're strengthening it. So we might build the process in a very basic form. Email comes in, we fill out a form, and then we send a package. So that might be version 1 of the process. Version 2 might be they fill out a form, they get an automatic email, then that goes into a project management system, and then the package gets sent. Then you might add other things like the accounting element, or you might add in the package automation or something like that. But ultimately, we want to continually release usable features that deliver value rather than trying to wait until the end of a project, because if you wait until the end, well, you might have built the wrong car or the wrong color or the wrong shape, or it's left-hand drive instead of right-hand drive or something like that. And so this often means that there is a lot of moving parts in a project. And so in order to get a project over the line, we want to look at all of those moving parts in isolation. So ultimately, you would have an Agile development backlog. This is what we use. And we have all the ideas that we want. We have all of the wish list items on the left in the backlog. Once we've talked through them, we understand them, we've defined them really well, we've thought about them, we've questioned you, done the 5 why example on all of those tasks, then we can select the ones that we're going to develop. And that might be because they're the most important, they're the ones that are going to have business impact right away. There might be a couple that We might merge ideas because we can do them in one sprint, or we might reduce the amount of complexity of a thing just so that we can get it out and test it and see what the users are doing. Then we put it into production, we test it, and then once it's tested, we roll it out to the users, and then we observe for a little bit of feedback just to see, how well is that being adopted? Is there more training requirement? Was there something that we missed in the conversation? Maybe a question we didn't ask. Maybe something that no one told us that we observed through the use of the platform. And once we've got that feature nailed, we're going to go right back to the list and we're going to build the next thing. And we often do a lot of these things in parallel. And so communication is key. We need to talk to you on all of those elements, and it makes it really easy for us to build a much better project because we've done the minimum viable project approach, and we've been able to ask you along the way, what is it that's going to deliver value? How do we get this up and running as fast as possible so that you are in it, you are using it, and the more you use it, the more ideas you have, the more we come back to the backlog and keep filling it up with more and more usable things. And each of those usable things delivers business value. And that eventually you will get to exponential growth because you are constantly in that state of consistent, continuous improvement, and life just gets easier and easier as you go. Okay, so there are different ways that we approach different projects based on the size and complexity of the organization. If you're a small business, quite possibly you could use the Big Bang approach. That is, whatever process you're using before, we build and you're in the new system. You do it in one go because it's low complexity. You weren't doing that much complex stuff before, so it's easy just to chuck it in. So we worked with businesses that just have a ton of spreadsheets, and we literally upload it into the system, design a few workflows, not a lot of complexity, hand it over, and then you start using it. That's one way. For those medium-sized businesses, we might need to do a little bit of a transition just to make sure that we're not going to lose any data or information, and that we're clear that we kept the good parts of the old system and moved that into the new system. So we want to make sure that we are improving on what you're doing, not just ripping and replacing all of the time. So we're going to observe all the things that are working really well in your previous systems. Then we're going to look at how do we replicate that in the new system, then build on top of that and improve it even more. Once we've done that, we can take the old information, put it in the new, start running the new system in parallel with the old system. Yes, it means a bit of extra work, but it does also reduce the risk of if something goes wrong or we need to revisit something, that we're not completely stuck and we haven't lost data. So in an organization that has a bit more risk or a bit more contacts or a bit more of a complex process, this is a better approach. It can often cost a little bit more, it takes more time, but it's definitely a worthwhile implementation approach to make sure that your business remains consistently operating, that you minimize the risk of any downside, and that you continue to remain profitable. Again, we want you to be successful. And then, of course, as a business grows and scales, it gets far more complex and difficult to do a large implementation project. So it doesn't mean that we can't do it. It just means that we break it down into chunks. So we might do via department, or we might do via process. So we might move all the HR stuff first, or we might move all of the project stuff first, or we might move the CRM. And taking some of those elements and moving and phasing it out means that we can still do the same thing. It's really just multiple sets of that parallel implementation approach. And sometimes it takes a little bit more team, a bit more thought, a little bit more training and education, but that's fine. So we can do really complex things. We just take a slightly different approach, but we end up with a positive result anyway. Some common mistakes that I often see when doing an implementation is over-engineering the problem. Like that car versus the skateboard problem, is they've tried to create something that is way too complicated before we've even started. We haven't even tested the water to see, is there a simpler way? If anyone's seen First Principles or heard of First Principles, that's where we boil the process down to its very critical essential elements and nothing more. Anything that doesn't add value to the process should be deleted, particularly in the first version. We might come back and re-implement things later or tweak and improve later, but also reducing the complexity reduces the time and the cost to implement. and also reduces the risk. So it's often better. Sometimes we add layers to projects that don't need to be there. Building in the wrong architecture. We talked about the system architecture earlier and how getting it right leaves you with usability of all of the standard features. You get better analytics, you have the email connectors, you have a lot more things that you can use that are already done without having to rebuild new reports, new analytics, new connectors, new integrations and automations. You're also far less likely to hit API limits because you're using the system within its intended limits. Another failure point often comes from misunderstanding the employee base. Sometimes thinking that by telling them you'll do that because I tell you to do that is not often a really good leadership style. It's not really a great way to get an implementation because you're asking people to change. And change is a hard thing. But if you create a culture of change where it becomes expected and accepted, then you know you're going to be in the right position. So you need to consult with your team. You need to allow for feedback, and you might change a small things. That's another reason why the Agile development pipeline works so well, is because we're just doing a lot of small changes that are easy to absorb, that are easy to get used to, instead of it being one giant change and then people throwing their hands up in the air and saying, I don't understand, I'm out. Now, we often talk to people and they go, I want something simple. I just want something simple. I just want something simple. And it's a little bit difficult to get to something that is so damn simple because it takes a lot of complexity to make the complex simple. And there's this creative tension that occurs between people that want user-friendly things and people that want things that are very, very technical. But the effective zone, as you can see by the diagram, is somewhere in the middle. We need the basic users to come up a bit and be a bit more sophisticated. And we need the technical users to come down and be less complicated. And that happy zone is when you reach business effectiveness. That's when there's enough data in the system, there's enough automation firing off, there's enough value being driven that it far outweighs, people going, I want something simple. That's probably because they're not technically minded, they don't understand, and they're not willing to put the effort in to try. So that happy zone in the middle is where you need to get to in order to have a good relationship between the technology and the humans. So another problem is looking purely at the cost versus understanding the value. We said that very early on at the start, and can understand that a little bit of investment in the right thing can mean a significant impact on the business in human time cost, perhaps in the speed of which that you can deliver to the customer, maybe in the throughput that you can have with the same team. So your upside is significantly higher when you make the right decisions, as opposed to reducing the downside, which might only be a few dollars. But then you're still having someone manually doing some task at $50,000 to $100,000 a year. It doesn't really make sense to me. I think if you could really think about it as a value proposition, as opposed to a cost proposition, you'll be much more successful. And the other thing is, no platform is an island. It needs to talk to other things. So you need to think about integration. You need to look at how it connects. And you're probably going to integrate multiple Zoho apps together. You're probably going to integrate multiple external apps together. Everything needs to connect to something else. Otherwise, it's not going to be used. It's just going to be this thing that everybody has to update. And ultimately, that connection, that interoperability makes it valuable because it's like the central brain that brings everything together, allows you to run your processes and tasks, and then has certain outputs out where it needs to go into the world. Some examples of where we've had significant impact in the past. We've done a lot with a non-profit organization called Happy Paws. They've actually been asked on stage at Zoholics, and we've also done a YouTube video with them. Basically, we've done a significant amount of work with them over the last 18 months to 2 years, and they've doubled in size. We've been able to give them amazing reporting to be able to understand when to hire, when to expand, how to manage their capacity in certain environments. We've done a lot with their volunteer management portal. And early on, one of the most significant things that we were able to deliver was a dashboard that saved them 5 days of manual report creation every month. You may have heard me talk about it earlier, but that was very significant in terms of a demonstration of what we could do with the system over time, understanding that this person was spending 5 days at $80,000 a year every month to create these reports. But Now they've got a dashboard that's just literally 2 clicks. In order to get that dashboard, we had to change some things in the CRM to allow the users to collect information in such a way that that information was available to present in a dashboard, instead of it being somewhat interpretational or somewhat qualitative in nature, where it's questions about things using people's opinions. Instead, now it's driven more on facts and data, and that helps to make much better decisions. The board are happy. We've been able to accelerate their growth. And again, that's just one small example. We've done significant things with contracts and using Zoho Sign, using Zoho Books, and so on and so forth. Another example is Polynovo. They're a biomedical firm that is listed on the ASX, and they have a very sophisticated process and a lot of reporting and analytics required. Because of their listed status, they have to be able to show certain things when they get audited on a regular basis. But one of the most impactful things we did was an Acumatica, which is a MyOb integration, because they're in 5 different countries. They have a different instance for every country. So all of those systems had to bring in sales data into the CRM. And in order to do that, they'd initially gone to MyOb Direct and asked, how much will it cost to integrate with Zoho? They were quoted $200,000. I think it was actually a bit more than that. But the quote for that, to integrate 5 instances of Acumatica, was quite a lot. We were able to do it in 1 day, which is equivalent to about $5,000 or $6,000. And we basically saved them $195,000 in doing an implementation using Zoho Flow. And the data is in there in a much more sophisticated way, and the CFO can have a play and fiddle with things and bring information in the way that they need to see it. And it is quite significant in terms of value for them. Now they're able to generate more reports, and that helps do their annual reporting, which is a very big process and is something that needs to be done in a very detailed and specific way, because you have, thousands, if not millions of investors looking at it, and they're going to scrutinize it. You can do a lot by bringing data into the platform. And as we go, we're still working with these people over the long term. We're building new features, new functions, having new aha moments, solving new problems on a regular basis. So it's going to be very exciting to see where they go. Another example is DMD Group. They are a wholesale coffee producer or supplier, and they also lease out their grinders and machines through subcontractors to the end cafe or the end user of those devices. Now, they needed to be able to manage very complex contracts, and they came from a MS-DOS system. So it looks like the command line. It's very ugly, it's very old, very early day computers. It was custom built and doesn't fit in the box of anything else. So we were able to build that in Zoho Creator and also give a portal to all of the customers so that the customers could log in and they could create orders. So I also gave another portal, or same portal, different access to their subcontractors, who could then be able to track inventory, but inventory on behalf of the main group. So the main group has a whole bunch of grinders and coffee machines, and they loan them out to the cafes. And then sometimes they get picked up by the subcontractor and they might be sitting in their warehouse. So they need a way to track these things between multiple warehouses, but also manage the contracts and leases on them. It's not an object they're going to sell, it's an asset they're retaining. So it's a little bit different to using Zoho Inventory, but they still use Zoho Inventory for their consumables and coffees and syrups and powders and things like that. So we've brought together a number of tools to create what is effectively a very sophisticated solution for this warehouse. And it's actually been quite cost effective compared to the alternatives that they were going to have to look at. So if you're watching the recording, that is the end of the presentation. And if you are live, you would have seen this page here, which shows you back to the landing page where this video is. So I would encourage you to go and get a copy of the Zoho One Setup Checklist and rewatch the video of this session, because it's really going to help you to get your project successful. Now, unfortunately, this was recorded before the conference, so I can't give you the Q&A, but I do encourage you to download the Zoho One Setup Checklist. Join us on YouTube, follow us and just see some of the content. We've got heaps of videos, demos, how-to guides, and also join our community. If you go to join.relevate.com.au, and those links will all be on the landing page. That will help you to answer your questions, get through any challenges or problems. If you need, you can pause it, you can rewatch certain parts, and it's just going to help you get a better project. We really want to empower you, make sure you have everything you need to have an amazing project and really get the benefit and the outcome of your investment. So thank you very much for watching. Please do enjoy the rest of Zoholics if you're watching this. And if you're after the event or you're watching this at another location or time, take care and you have a great day.